They mocked me for something so small, something they thought proved I would never belong in their perfect world. They laughed at my shoes, turned me into the family's quiet punchline, erased me from their photos and gatherings as if I had never mattered. What they didn't know was that every insult, every dismissal, every smirk only pushed me closer to a truth they couldn't see coming. Because one day, when they least expected it, I would walk into their lives not as the outcast they had branded me, but as the owner of everything they thought defined them. The house they bragged about, the symbol of their pride and arrogance, would be mine, bought in cash, right under their noses. How did it happen? What drove me to turn years of humiliation into the greatest reversal of their lives? Stay with me through this story and find out. And before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and tell me in the comments what you think the twist is before I reveal it. I arrived 10 minutes early that afternoon, not because I was eager to be there, but because I knew arriving late would give them even more reason to talk. My truck, a rusting Dodge Ram with one working speaker and the engine light permanently on, had no business parked next to Ethan's Tesla or Kayla's imported SUV. But I didn't come to impress anyone. I came for Mia, my niece, who still ran to hug me like she didn't care what I wore or drove. I clutched the small gift I had wrapped myself, an antique compass I found at a flea market that reminded me of my dad's, and walked up the cobblestone driveway of their freshly painted suburban palace. The house smelled like money, polished wood floors, lemony cleaning products, and whatever trendy candle scent was currently making waves on Pinterest. Kayla opened the door with a perfectly manicured smile, scanned me from head to toe, and said it before even hello. "Those shoes still holding up?" She grinned like it was a harmless joke. Then came the coupon, slid into my hand with surgical precision. "Great styles. You like them?" I almost laughed, but something in the way her eyes lingered on my boots. Boots I'd had since 2012, boots that had walked through drywall dust, rental renovations, and cold winter nights in empty homes I was flipping. Made it sting. I wasn't embarrassed by the shoes. Not until someone looked at them like they were a disease. Inside, the house buzzed with chatter, clinking glasses, and the occasional shriek from oversugared kids. Everyone was there. Relatives I hadn't seen in years, co-workers of Ethan's, Kayla's Pilates group. I waved at a few cousins who looked right past me, pretending they didn't see me, or perhaps hoping I'd disappear on my own. I walked toward the living room, where Ethan stood beside the sliding glass doors, holding court with two guys in identical blue sport coats. When he spotted me, his smile faltered for half a second, just enough for me to catch it, before he raised his hand and shouted, "Hey, Caleb, look who crawled out of the woodwork." I smiled, nodded, said, "Hey," and found a corner. I wasn't here to be noticed. I was here because Mia had texted me last week, asking if I'd come. "Please, Uncle Caleb, you never come anymore. I want you there." And I couldn't say no to her. Then came the moment Kayla clapped her hands and announced a family photo. Everyone moved outside to the backyard, where a hired photographer was setting up. I hesitated, hanging back near the patio door, but Ethan waved me over. "Come on, Caleb. Can't leave you out. You're family, right?" I stepped into the lineup, but Kayla looked at the photographer and said, "Maybe shift Caleb to the end. That way the light won't bounce off his shirt weird." The group laughed. I smiled. I moved. Later that night, scrolling Facebook in my truck before heading home, I saw the post, "So grateful for family." Hashtag blessed hashtag MIA's birthday. There was the group photo, perfectly lit. Except I wasn't in it. They had cropped me out. Not partially, entirely. Still, I didn't stew. I sharpened. When you've spent your adult life being invisible to your blood, you learn to channel that bitterness like fuel. So when another invitation arrived, this time for a casual family brunch, I didn't ignore it. I accepted with the same neutral politeness I'd mastered years ago. The brunch was to be held at Ethan's place again, this time in celebration of Kayla's sister getting engaged. Apparently, it was a whole ordeal. A dozen guests, mimosas, a grazing table, and a house tour for the fiancé's parents. I arrived right on time, as usual, stepping onto their oversized doormat that read, "Welcome to the good life." The irony so thick I nearly laughed. This time, Kayla opened the door with her phone, pressed to her ear, and motioned for me to wait. I stood there on the porch for nearly 3 minutes, holding a modest flower bouquet I'd picked up from a local market. When she finally hung up, she gave me a distracted nod and said, "Oh, Caleb, you're early." I wasn't. I was on the dot. Inside, the brunch was already in full swing. Crystal glasses, eggs Benedict, overpriced jams laid out on imported trays, and conversations flowing about investments, crypto, and destination weddings. I kept to myself, nodded where appropriate, and waited for a seat at the table. There were none. Every chair had been taken or had a sweater, a bag, a wine glass already claiming it. I stood awkwardly for a moment until Ethan spotted me. "Caleb, glad you made it. We weren't sure if you'd be comfortable sitting with everyone, so Kayla set up a spot for you in the mudroom. It's quieter there, in the mudroom, where the coats hung, the dog's food bowl sat, and an air freshener tried desperately to mask whatever smell came from under the floor tiles." I stood frozen. People glanced over, smiled with pity, then returned to their bottomless flutes. I followed Kayla toward the back hallway, where she had set a tiny plate on a folding tray, beside a bottle of cleaning spray and a chewed tennis ball. "Hope you don't mind," she said, brushing dust off a nearby stool. "It's just that it gets so crowded in the dining room." I sat down slowly, knees bumping against the tray, the stool creaking under my weight. I stared at my plate, half a croissant, a few strawberries, and a tiny glass of orange juice, not even the sparkling kind. No silverware, no napkin, no conversation. I could hear laughter coming from the main room, Kayla giggling at some story about Napa Valley, and Ethan doing his big laugh, the one he uses when important people are around. I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed. Still, I ate in silence. About 15 minutes later, their dog, Duke, trotted in and sniffed at my leg. Then, without warning, lifted his leg and marked the corner of my stool. I pushed back, startled, knocking over the tray. The croissant hit the floor. My juice splashed on my jeans. I froze, hand clenched, breathing steady. Kayla rushed in, not to apologize, but to grab the dog. "Oh, he never does that," she said with a laugh, wiping the floor with a paper towel. "Maybe he's confused by the smell." She sniffed. "Is that paint thinner?" I stared at her, my mouth dry. "I came straight from a job site," I said calmly. "Didn't have time to change." She nodded, like that explained everything. "Of course. That makes sense." She looked at me with something between amusement and pity, like she was cataloging the encounter for later gossip. I stood, picked up the plate, and placed it on the washer beside me. "Thanks for brunch," I said. "Next time, I'll bring my own chair. Maybe even a tarp." Kayla smiled, not catching the sarcasm, or maybe pretending not to. I walked back to the main room, retrieved the flower bouquet I had left near the door, and headed outside. As I stepped into the sunlight, I heard a voice behind me, Mia's. "Uncle Caleb, wait." She ran up, hugging my waist. They had partnered with a boutique real estate group from Austin, invited neighbors, some mid-tier influencers, and a few friends from Ethan's golf club. The event was designed to look philanthropic, but was, in reality, just another excuse for Ethan to show off his designer furniture and for Kayla to parade her new kitchen backsplash. I wasn't on the original guest list. Mia had texted me the flyer, followed by, "Mom says it's not your thing, but I wish you'd come." That was enough for me. I showed up dressed clean, not fancy, dark jeans, a crisp button-down shirt, and yes, the same boots. I wasn't there to impress, just to observe. As I approached the door, I could already hear the clinking of glasses and the forced laughter of suburban ambition. Kayla opened the door with that tight smile she reserved just for me and said, "Well, this is a surprise," as if she had already bet against me showing up. Inside, the house had been transformed into something out of a lifestyle magazine. Scented candles, ambient lighting, and smooth jazz oozing from hidden speakers. I walked past a table of name tags. Mine wasn't there. I kept walking. As I stepped into the kitchen, I noticed Ethan in mid-story, standing beside a projection screen showing slides of his company's newest milestones. He was surrounded by a semicircle of men in pastel shirts and leather loafers, laughing on cue. The moment he saw me, he grinned and raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, beckoning with theatrical flair, "if it isn't my older brother, Caleb, the rebel, the mystery man, the handyman of the family." A few guests chuckled politely. "He's got the strongest back in the business, right, Caleb? Still doing that. What is it? Sheetrock and plumbing? Or are you flipping haunted houses now?" I smiled, walked closer, and said evenly, still building wealth. Quietly. Ethan nodded like I'd made a dad joke. "He's modest," he said to the group. "But between you and me," he leaned in, stage whispering, "he once installed a toilet backwards. Isn't that right, Caleb?" Laughter broke out again. One of the guests, a man with overly white teeth and a tan that screamed artificial, chimed in, "Hey, I've been looking for someone to fix my deck. You charge by the hour or by the mood?" More laughter. Caleb passed by, holding a tray of mini quiches. "Careful, Caleb," she said. "These are truffle-infused. Might not pair well with Pabst Blue Ribbon." The entire kitchen chuckled, as if she were a stand-up comic. I nodded, took a quiche, and bit into it slowly, savoring the silence that followed. No one quite knew how to react when you refused to flinch. Later in the evening, as the crowd spilled into the backyard, someone had set up a donation photo booth with props. A whiteboard asked, "What does success mean to you?" Guests wrote things like freedom, or retirement by 40, or private jets and peace of mind. Someone handed me the board and a marker. I didn't hesitate. I wrote, "Owning the house that once tried to lock you out." When I held it up, a few people clapped, unsure if it was a joke. Ethan glanced over, eyes narrowing. He walked up and said, "Okay, Mr. Mysterious, you keep throwing out riddles. Are you secretly Batman, or just really into thrift stores?" I leaned in and said quietly, "You'll find out soon enough." He smiled, but I could see the flicker of confusion beneath it. Later, as the evening wound down, the projector was brought back out for a fun family trivia segment. Kayla took the mic and said, "Okay, everyone, let's test who knows the Brody family best." I almost walked away, but I stayed. The first few questions were harmless: birthdays, pets, inside jokes. Then came the kicker. Which family member once got kicked out of Home Depot for using the paint mixer without permission? Kayla's eyes sparkled. Ethan smirked. The guests shouted in unison, "Caleb!" The laughter was immediate, loud, and sustained. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I simply looked at the screen, then back at them. But before any of that could happen, another opportunity to witness their arrogance firsthand came knocking. It arrived in the form of an invitation to a wine-tasting dinner Kayla was throwing to welcome her cousin's new fiancé, a young investment banker from New York with more ambition than tact. I wasn't formally invited, again, but Mia texted me a photo of the setup and added a sad face emoji, so I showed up anyway. The front door was open when I arrived, and the smell of roasted duck and truffle oil wafted out as I stepped inside. The house was spotless, every inch curated to impress. Ethan spotted me before I could even close the door and gave me a half smile. "Caleb," he said, tone flat, "you're here." Didn't realize you got the memo. I responded with a nod and handed him a bottle of wine. Nothing fancy, just a decent Napa Red. He took it like I'd handed him a can of soda. We're actually only serving French tonight, he said, placing it out of view near the pantry. I walked in, greeted Mia with a warm hug, then made my way toward the living room where the guests were mingling. Kayla, in a silk blouse and towering heels, turned toward me with a surprised expression that felt more rehearsed than real. "Oh," she said, "you came? That's so spontaneous of you." Her cousin's fiancé, Tyler, stepped up and introduced himself, offering a firm handshake and that classic "I went to Wharton" smile. "So what do you do, Caleb?" he asked. I opened my mouth, but Kayla interrupted. "He's kind of a local legend," she said with a chuckle. "One of those hands-on guys who knows a little about everything. Plumbing, drywall, maybe even landscaping." The guests laughed politely. Tyler raised an eyebrow. "That's cool. Always good to have someone around who knows how to fix stuff." Ethan appeared beside me and added, "Especially when your own house is falling apart. Right, Caleb?" He elbowed me gently, like it was all in good fun. I smiled, let it land, then responded right. You never know when the foundation might start cracking under all that weight. He paused, unsure whether I meant the literal house or the metaphorical life they were balancing. Then, as if trying to reassert dominance, he clapped me on the back and led me toward the dining room. The long table was set with fine china, tapered candles, and name cards. I noticed there wasn't one for me. I took a step back, thinking maybe they had just forgotten, but Kayla noticed and quickly said, "Oh, Caleb, we thought you'd be more comfortable on the patio. It's quieter out there, and we know how much you hate crowds." She said it sweetly, like it was a favor, not an exile. I nodded again, walked out to the patio, and saw a small bistro table set for one. A single chair, no candle, no place card, just a plate and a glass already filled with water, as if I was a last-minute afterthought. I sat down without complaint. Through the sliding glass doors, I could see everyone else laughing, toasting, passing plates. No one looked out at me. I wasn't a guest. I was a placeholder. 20 minutes later, Ethan came outside with a plate of food and set it in front of me like I was his tenant. Kayla didn't want to risk the duck getting cold, he said, then added with a smirk, "Plus, we didn't want the banker types to feel underdressed." I looked at him for a long second and said, "You know, Ethan, if I charged you rent for every time you talked down to me, you'd owe back pay." He laughed, a little too loud, unsure if I was serious. "Man, you always had a weird sense of humor," he said, then went back inside. I ate slowly, watching them through the glass like I was observing a zoo exhibit. They were performing so hard. Kayla with her perfect pronunciation of wine regions, Ethan dropping startup buzzwords he barely understood, and Tyler doing his best to impress everyone while clearly evaluating which cousin might be a better long-term investment. I could have hated them, but I didn't. I pitied them. They were clinging to a version of success that was crumbling under their feet, and they were too busy performing to notice. After dessert, Mia snuck outside and sat beside me. "Mom said you like being alone," she whispered. "But I don't think that's true." I looked at her and said, "I like being respected. That's different." She nodded solemnly and handed me a drawing she'd made of me and her standing in front of a big house. She'd labeled it Uncle Caleb's future home. Lost it right there. I hugged her tight and said, "You're not wrong, sweetheart." Because she wasn't. Not because of the sentiment, though that was powerful, but because Mia saw something in me none of the adults at that dinner ever would. She saw stability. She saw safety. She saw family. Meanwhile, her parents saw a man to mock, to dismiss, to sideline like I was some distant cousin from a branch they wished had dried up decades ago. The paperwork to initiate foreclosure proceedings had already been scheduled for filing that Monday. I had a choice: Move forward quickly and confront them head on, or wait for the house to turn sour under their feet as naturally and subtly as their laughter faded the moment I walked into a room. I chose the latter. I didn't want to be a bulldozer. I wanted to be gravity, inevitable, silent, and unshakable. But before I could implement the final steps of my plan, Kayla found a new way to remind me just how replaceable I was in their narrative. It happened the next week when a distant relative, our uncle from Oregon, passed away and left behind a few mementos and some photo albums to be divided among the remaining family. Ethan and Kayla offered to host the small memorial at their house. I wasn't formally asked to attend, but I was still technically family, so I showed up in black slacks and a charcoal shirt, holding a modest bouquet of white lilies. As I walked through the door, no one greeted me. The place buzzed with soft conversation, old memories, and the low hum of classical music from a Bluetooth speaker. A photo board had been set up on an easel by the fireplace, displaying printed pictures of family events spanning decades. I walked over, scanning the images, looking for that familiar moment. Christmases, Thanksgivings, reunions by the lake, but I noticed something strange. I wasn't in any of them. Not one. Photos I clearly remembered being part of were cropped, reframed, or replaced entirely. In one particular photo from a family camping trip, where I had grilled burgers for 14 people, I recognized the background and the tent I'd pitched myself. But the only people in the photo were Ethan, Kayla, and two cousins. My face was gone, edited out, as if I'd never existed. I stood there for a full minute, waiting for someone to acknowledge it, to explain, to pretend like it wasn't deliberate. No one did. Kayla brushed past me, whispering to someone nearby. I just didn't want the board to feel cluttered. Clean lines, minimal distractions. You know, she didn't look at me when she said it, but she knew I heard. Ethan, across the room, poured champagne into two flutes and offered one to a woman I didn't recognize. He raised his glass, made eye contact with me, and gave a nod, not of respect, but of dismissal. The kind you give when you're too polite to say you can leave now. But I stayed. I stayed because I needed to see it all. The curated version of our family, where I had been gently erased, pixel by pixel, memory by memory. I didn't lash out. I didn't confront. I just stood there and absorbed it like I always did. Mia came running up at one point, tugged on my hand, and asked, "Uncle Caleb, did you see the big photo from the lake?" I smiled and said, "I did, sweetie." She frowned. "But you're not in it. That's weird, right? You were the one who taught me how to roast marshmallows that day." I crouched beside her and whispered, "Sometimes people forget things that make them uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean they didn't happen." She nodded like she understood, even if only halfway. Then she hugged me and skipped away. After the memorial, everyone was invited to stay for coffee and cookies. I sat on the edge of the room, next to an end table that still had the tag from Home Goods dangling underneath it. A few distant relatives came by to make small talk, most of it shallow and vaguely patronizing. One of them, a cousin I hadn't seen in a decade, leaned over and said, "It's nice you still show up, Caleb. Even if, your life took a different path." I wanted to ask what path she thought I'd taken. Some tragic detour through homelessness and failure. But I didn't. I just smiled and replied, "Some paths are quieter than others, but they get you where you need to go just the same." That night, as I walked to my truck, I noticed that the family photo had been uploaded to the event page Ethan had created online. Sure enough, it had been cropped again. The original image, where I had stood next to Ethan's left shoulder, now ended right where his arm touched mine. It was subtle, professional, and unmistakably intentional. I saved the image to my phone and labeled it proof of absence. Not because I needed a reminder, but because one day I would show it to someone who mattered. Someone like Mia, when she was old enough to ask why her favorite uncle wasn't in the history books her parents wrote. And I'd show her that being cropped out doesn't mean you didn't shape the moment. It just means someone else was scared of what your presence represented. That week, I finalized the paperwork to trigger formal foreclosure proceedings. There was no direct mention of me in the message, no personal invitation, but I knew Mia would want me there, and sure enough, just an hour later, she messaged me a string of sun emojis and a "can't wait to see you." That sealed it. I showed up that Sunday with a homemade peach cobbler in hand, the same recipe our mother used to make when we were kids, thinking maybe, just maybe, there's some shred of warmth left under the surface. I parked a block away again, even though there was plenty of space in their driveway. Old habits die hard. As I walked up, I could already hear laughter and music and the distinct sizzle of meat on the grill. Kids darted through the yard with water balloons while the adults stood in tight circles, holding plastic cups and talking about their latest Amazon purchases like stockbrokers analyzing market trends. I stepped in the backyard and was greeted first by Duke, the dog who had once peed near my stool. He barked, then wagged his tail, which was more welcome than I got from any human. Ethan turned from the grill, spatula in hand, and said, "Look who's back. Caleb, didn't expect you today." Not exactly warm, but not hostile. Kayla followed quickly, dried her hands on a monogram towel, and added, "We already have the food sorted, but you can leave your dessert by the cooler. Just try not to let it get warm too fast, okay?" I placed the cobbler down without a word. I wasn't there to start anything. I just wanted to spend time with Mia and maybe remind myself that there was still a trace of human connection somewhere beneath the curated perfection of Ethan's world. I found Mia near the garden, helping decorate cupcakes, and she lit up when she saw me. She pulled me into a game of beanbag toss, and for 20 minutes, I forgot the politics, the posturing, the pain. Just an uncle and his niece in the sun. But the illusion didn't last. Later, as we sat under the canopy eating slices of watermelon, Ethan approached with a red Solo cup and a smirk. "So, Caleb," he said, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear, "any big projects lately? Fix any leaky faucets or save a raccoon from a crawl space?" The group chuckled. One man asked if I did siding work and if I offered pity rates for family. Kayla leaned over and added, "Or maybe you've moved on from homes and into what? Street art? Found objects." Her laughter was sharp, not playful. I swallowed the fruit in my mouth and said calmly, "Actually, I've been collecting properties. Quietly. Not a big talker, but I like things that last longer than a joke. That earn a few raised eyebrows and one polite cough." Ethan changed the subject quickly, but the damage was done. I had cracked their performance, even if just slightly. Later, as I helped Mia clean up the cupcake mess, Kayla came over holding a clipboard and a roll of trash bags. "We're assigning cleanup zones," she said. "Since you're already over here, you can handle the garden area. Just make sure the compost goes in the green bin, not the trash. We're trying to be eco-conscious." She handed me a pair of rubber gloves. I stared at them for a long second before saying, "Sure, wouldn't want to ruin the brand image." As I cleaned, crouched down in the dirt like someday, labor, instead of the legal owner of the very ground beneath my feet, I felt the last frayed thread between us snap. There was no relationship here, no brotherhood, no kindness, just condescension, layered under manners and wine. After the trash was taken out, I returned to the cooler to grab a soda. That's when I overheard Kayla talking to a guest near the kitchen window. "We told Mia not to get too attached," she was saying. "You never know with people like that. He drifts in, brings a pie, and then disappears for 6 months. She needs consistency, not nostalgia." I felt it like a punch to the gut. I wasn't nostalgia. I was the one who remembered her birthday when her own parents forgot it 2 years ago. I was the one who helped her with her diorama project when Ethan was too busy closing a funding round. I was the one who picked her up from ballet when Kayla had an appointment. But none of that mattered. Not to them. They had written me out of the story in their minds and kept me around like a prop, useful only when they needed a point of comparison or someone to carry folding chairs. I walked to Mia, handed her a folded note, and whispered, "Don't open it until later, okay?" She nodded, hugged me, and ran off. Inside the note was a simple promise. You are not the version of me they talk about. One day, you'll see the whole story. I left quietly, as always. That night, I logged in my legal dashboard and approved the service notice. Inside, it was the official notice of debt acquisition and an introductory statement from the newly listed mortgage holder, one of my shell companies, outlining the terms of default, options for negotiation, and the ticking clock that now ruled their lives. 90 days. That's how long they had before the property would be legally eligible for repossession. And while that window might seem generous to some, I knew the state of their finances well enough to predict what would happen. Ethan was leveraged. He had overextended to maintain the illusion of wealth, pouring money into lifestyle instead of equity. The cars, the events, the upgrades, all funded through revolving lines of credit, maxed out business cards, and a helic that was about to balloon. Kayla's boutique side hustle had stopped turning profits 6 months ago, and her silent investors were quietly pulling out. I knew it all because I had done my homework. I had accessed public records, skimmed court filings, tracked property liens, and hired a financial investigator to confirm what I already suspected. My brother wasn't just house poor. He was on the verge of implosion. Still, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. That moment would come, but it wasn't time. For now, I waited just like I always had, letting them come to me. The first sign of panic came in the form of a family group chat message that simply read, "Does anyone know a good mortgage attorney?" Asking for a friend. It was followed by an emoji, laughing face with sweat, but no one responded. 2 days after that, Kayla posted a vague, inspirational quote on her Instagram story about weathering the storm and only God knowing your journey. A sure sign something had gone terribly wrong in her pristine world. I watched in silence, still showing up to work sites in my boots, still driving my old truck, still answering tenant emails and reviewing contractor bids like nothing had changed. Because for me, nothing had. I was still invisible in their world, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Then Ethan called. For the first time in over a year, he dialed my number and actually waited for me to pick up. When I answered, his voice was tight, professional, trying hard to sound casual. "Hey, Caleb. Hope you're good. Listen, random question. Have you ever heard of a company called Greenridge Property Holdings?" I paused for effect, then said why. He laughed nervously. "Well, they just bought our mortgage, apparently. Sent us some stuff in the mail. And now there's all this talk about missed payments and, I don't know, foreclosure. Feels kind of aggressive, right?" I let the silence stretch just long enough before saying, "Sounds serious." He chuckled again, thinner this time. "Yeah, it's probably a mix-up. We've had some refinancing stuff in the works, so maybe wires got crossed." I nodded, knowing he couldn't see me. "Hope you get it sorted." He hesitated, then asked, "You wouldn't happen to know anyone over there, would you?" That was the moment. The tide had turned. The balance of power had shifted completely, and he didn't even realize how far beneath the water he already was. "Can't say that I do," I replied. "But if you need help figuring it out, maybe you should talk to a professional." He muttered something about lawyers and ended the call with a rushed, "Thanks, man. We'll catch up soon." I hung up, placed my phone down, and exhaled slowly. There was the first crack in the porcelain mask Ethan wore so proudly. Within days, more signs emerged. Their weekly backyard get-together stopped. Kayla canceled a wine subscription she used to flaunt on social media. Mia's Dance Academy posted a fundraiser link for tuition support, and though it didn't name names, I saw her photo front and center. My heart ached for Mia, because none of this was her fault. She was caught in a storm she didn't create, watching her perfect world start to crumble while her parents scrambled to maintain appearances. One evening, I drove past their house slowly, not to spy, but to see the signs of change. The lawn had gone a little wild, the garden wasn't trimmed, and a for sale by owner sign had appeared in the front yard. It was a last-ditch effort. I knew, a desperate attempt to offload the property before the foreclosure process took full hold. But it wouldn't work. Not with the liens I now held. Any sale would have to go through me. They were boxed in, and the walls were closing tighter by the day. A week later, Ethan called again, this time sounding breathless. "Caleb," he said, no fake cheer in his voice this time. "Listen, I don't know what's going on, but this company's being really aggressive. They rejected our proposed payment plan, and now they're talking about legal proceedings. We're trying to work something out, but it's like they're not even interested." I didn't respond immediately. I let the weight of his words settle. Then I said, "That's rough." He snapped a little then, his composure cracking. "Come on, man. I know you don't like me. I know things have been weird, but this is our home. Mia lives here. We built everything around this place. We just need some time." And there it was, the first real plea. Not a joke, not a dig, not a smug dismissal, but a genuine request for mercy. And for a split second, I almost considered easing up. Almost. But then I remembered every snide remark, every dismissal, every insult they'd cloaked in politeness. I remembered the mudroom brunch, the cropped photos, the patio dinner, and the erasure from every family gathering that mattered. I thought of the gloves they handed me for cleanup, the way Kayla spoke about me to her friends, the way Ethan treated my presence like an inconvenience he had to endure. The paper flapped gently in the wind, taped just above the doorknob where every neighbor, delivery driver, and school parent would see it. It was no longer a quiet legal process. Now it was public. The house, the symbol of Ethan and Kayla's curated life, was entering the final phase of its collapse. They could no longer pretend. No more dinner parties. No more garden fundraisers. No more filtered stories showing hand-poured candles and color-coordinated shelf decor. The facade was cracking like plaster under water damage, and the silence from their social feeds was deafening. I didn't drive by that day. I didn't need to. I already knew how it would go. Ethan would panic, Kayla would spin, and Mia would be told something vague about restructuring or downsizing or exploring opportunities. But the truth would hang there on the door like a scarlet letter. And then, 3 days later, came the moment I had waited for. Ethan asked to meet. No calls, no texts, just a handwritten note left under the windshield wiper of my truck, placed carefully so it wouldn't blow away. It read, "I know it's you. Please, one conversation. That's all I'm asking." I didn't respond for a day. Then I sent him a location, an old diner on the edge of town, the kind with cracked leather booze and coffee that tastes like burnt rubber but feels like home. I got there early and sat by the window. When Ethan walked in, he looked nothing like the man who used to gloat by his grill or pose with overpriced wine bottles for his friends. His suit was wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, and for once he looked like someone who had been humbled, not someone playing the part. He slid into the booth across from me and didn't say a word for a full minute. Just looked at his hands, picked at a thumbnail, and finally exhaled. "I figured it out," he said. "Greenridge, the shell company, the quiet offers, the silence. It's all you, isn't it?" I took a sip of coffee. "Took you long enough." He nodded, eyes flashing with a mixture of disbelief and something close to respect. "Why?" he asked. "You could have confronted us. You could have just told us what was happening. You didn't have to play it this way." I looked him dead in the eyes. "You think this is a game? Ethan, for years you treated me like furniture, like a utility, something you plug in when you need help and ignore when the company comes over. You never once thought of me as an equal. You laughed at me, edited me out of photos, made jokes at my expense like I was some cartoon character in your perfect little world. And every time you pushed me to the side, you made it clear I wasn't family. I was a footnote. He swallowed hard. So this is revenge? I shook my head. No, this is consequence. You spent years cashing checks from the Bank of Arrogance, and the payment just came due. He rubbed his face with both hands, then leaned back in the booth. We're going to lose the house. Mia's going to lose her home. I leaned forward. Mia deserves better than to live in a house built on lies. You told her I was unreliable, remember? That I'd disappear. But I never left her. You pushed me out. You made me a stranger. He was quiet. For once, completely, deeply quiet. And then, so what happens now? I took out a folder and placed it on the table. Inside was a document listing terms for a buyback clause, one that would allow them to stay as tenants if they signed over ownership immediately and agreed to a fixed rental term under my company. It was generous, considering the circumstances. More generous than I needed to be. You signed this, you stay. But you no longer own this place. That chapter ends here. You pay rent like everyone else. On time. No exceptions. No special treatment. He opened the folder and read it slowly, then looked back up. Why are you offering this? I answered simply, because Mia shouldn't suffer for your pride. He signed, right there, in silence, the pen trembling slightly as he scrawled his name across the dotted line. The deal was done. The house was mine. Legally. Permanently. He handed the folder back, and I placed it in my bag. The waitress came by to refill our coffee. Neither of us touched it. As we left the diner, Ethan stopped me in the parking lot. You always were smarter than I gave you credit for, he said. I nodded. You always were more fragile than you pretended to be. He didn't follow me to my truck. He turned and walked away, shoulders slumped, phone buzzing in his pocket as if the world still wanted something from him. I drove straight to the house, not to gloat, not to celebrate, but to look at it through new eyes. It was mine now. The porch where I had once waited to be let in, the kitchen where they had served me last, the mudroom where I had been exiled. All of it belonged to me. I rang the doorbell, and Mia answered. Uncle Caleb, she shouted, launching herself into my arms. Guess what? Mom said we might be moving, but then she said maybe we're not. It's confusing. I looked into her eyes and said, You're not moving anywhere, kiddo. I promise. She grinned, then asked, Can I show you my room again? I nodded. Of course. As we walked inside, I passed Kayla in the hallway. Her face froze when she saw me, but I didn't stop. 2 weeks after Ethan signed over the deed, things began to unravel publicly for them in a way no curated Instagram feed could conceal. The first visible shift came with the for sale listings. Kayla's luxury kitchen gadgets, her carefully curated antique sideboard, and even a mid-century sofa she once bragged about scoring from a New York showroom were suddenly being offered online at steep discounts. Descriptions like gently used and minimal where tried to dress up the truth, but to anyone who knew them, the message was clear: liquidation. The golden couple of the cul-de-sac was downsizing, not by choice but by necessity. And while I didn't revel in their hardship, I watched every move with quiet precision, not out of vengeance, but because I needed to know how they'd choose to handle the reality they'd spent years pretending didn't exist. At first, they pretended nothing had changed. They kept hosting small, awkward barbecues where guests sat on folding chairs instead of designer loungers, and the wine shifted from French vintages to clearance bottles from the local supermarket. Kayla, still dressed in silk blouses but now with less jewelry, clung to her image like a drowning woman gripping a sinking ship. Ethan became withdrawn, no longer telling his endless stories about startup deals or golfing with local CEOs. Instead, he hovered in the background, sipping drinks he no longer tasted, occasionally checking his phone as if salvation might text him. But the real fracture came when word got out among the neighborhood. People talk. They always do. And when that foreclosure notice hit their door, someone snapped a photo and shared it in the neighborhood group chat. Whispers turned to questions, and questions turned into exclusion. Invitations to charity auctions and wine clubs stopped arriving. Ethan's name was quietly removed from the HOA board nomination list. Kayla's followers on social media began to drop, slowly at first, then rapidly, as sponsorships dried up and her boutique brand was listed as inactive on its website. Mia began noticing too. She came home from school one day, asking why her friends were making fun of her shoes, which used to be the newest brand but were now last season's clearance items. Kayla tried to spin it, saying trends moved too fast to matter, but kids see through lies faster than adults. That night, Mia cried quietly in her room, and I know because I was there fixing a leaky faucet in the hallway bathroom when I heard it. They wouldn't call a professional anymore, not when they had a landlord who knew how to do the work himself. I didn't knock. I didn't comfort. That wasn't my place. Not yet. But I noted it all. A few days later, Ethan cornered me in the garage, where he'd started storing furniture and boxes they couldn't afford to keep inside the house. "This is humiliating," he muttered, gesturing to the mess. "We used to be respected, you know? People used to care what we thought." I responded evenly. Respect isn't about appearances. It's about how you treat people when you don't need anything from them. He sighed, then looked at me, really looked like he finally saw me for the first time in years. "Do you ever think we pushed too hard? Said too much?" I didn't blink. "You didn't just push, Ethan. You erased," and then acted surprised when I showed up again. He nodded slowly, like a man unraveling a knot he tied himself. "I'm sorry," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "For all of it." I said nothing, because apologies without action are just noise. Over the next week, the tension in the house grew thicker. Kayla stopped speaking to Ethan in front of me. Her eyes hardened, mouth pursed. I overheard sharp words exchanged late at night. Something about missed opportunities, failed investments, and Ethan's ego dragging them into ruin. The golden couple, once united by ambition and image, was now crumbling under the weight of their own facade. They began sleeping in separate rooms. Mia, sensing the shift, spent more time outside, often asking if she could come over to my place down the block just to do homework or help with dinner. I never said no. She brought her sketch pad once and showed me a new drawing. The same house as before, but this time there were 3 figures on the porch, me, her, and someone holding a suitcase, walking away. She didn't explain it, and I didn't ask. But I understood. Ethan lost his job shortly after that. His company had been circling layoffs for months, and when the investor funding dried up, they cut him loose with a polite email and a final paycheck that barely covered their next month's rent. He didn't tell anyone at first, just kept getting dressed in the morning and pretending to go to work, driving to coffee shops and sitting in his car. I only knew because I passed by one morning and saw him slumped over the wheel, eyes closed, the suit jacket still on its hanger in the back seat. I didn't stop. Some lessons have to hurt before they sink in. The weeks that followed cemented what I already knew. The golden couple was no more. Ethan stopped shaving, his face now shadowed with stubble, and his once pristine polo shirts hung loose on his frame. Kayla no longer floated around the neighborhood with that effortless air of superiority. Instead, she moved with the heaviness of someone who had spent too long pretending, too long holding up a mask that finally cracked. The house, my house, stood as the last reminder of their downfall. They had signed it away, reduced from proud owners to tenants living under my terms, a reality that gnawed at them every time they opened the front door. Mia was the only bright light in that house. She still ran to me when she saw me outside, still tugged at my hand asking if I could help with her school projects, still slipped me drawings with captions like, "Best uncle ever." It was for her and her alone that I had offered Ethan and Kayla the chance to stay. But even with that grace, their resentment bubbled. They didn't thank me. They didn't acknowledge the mercy in the offer. They just carried themselves like squatters clinging to a throne already lost. Then came Thanksgiving, the holiday that had always been about family, about gathering, about gratitude. That year, Ethan and Kayla decided not to host. They said it was too much work and not the right time, but the truth was they couldn't bear the humiliation of opening their doors to family who now knew the story. Instead, I hosted at my place, a modest home compared to the mansion, but warm, honest, and filled with real laughter. Word spread quickly, and cousins, uncles, even distant relatives chose to come. By the time the turkey hit the table, every chair was full, and I found myself at the head of a table larger than any Ethan had ever set. Kayla didn't show. Ethan came late, dragging his feet, and sat in the only empty chair at the far end. He didn't eat much. He didn't talk much. He just watched. Watched me carve the turkey. Watched me help pass rolls to cousins. Watched the family that once revolved around his house now orbit mine. And for the first time, I think he understood. After dinner, when the kids ran outside to play, Ethan walked up to me quietly. "You won," he said, his voice low. "You've got the house, the family, the respect. Everything I thought was mine. It's all yours now." I shook my head. This was never about winning, Ethan. It was about respect. Something you never gave me until you had no choice. He frowned. "So what now? You keep us under your thumb? Watch us rot in what used to be ours." I put my hand on his shoulder, firm but steady. "What now is up to you. You can keep resenting me, keep blaming me, keep drowning in the lies you built. Or you can start over. Humility doesn't kill people, Ethan. Pride does." He looked away, eyes wet, but said nothing. He left before dessert, slipping out like a ghost. Kayla didn't even send a message. But Mia stayed. She stayed long after the dishes were done, curled up on the couch beside me, drawing again. This time, the picture was of two houses, one large, one smaller. In front of the smaller one, she drew me, smiling, surrounded by family. In front of the larger one, she drew a couple standing far apart, frowning. She didn't explain, but she didn't have to. Kids see truth more clearly than adults ever will. When she fell asleep, I carried her upstairs to the guest room I'd made just for her. As I tucked her in, I realized the meaning of all of this wasn't the house or the money or the reversal of fortune. It was the proof that no matter how many times someone tries to erase you, to crop you out, to laugh at your shoes or exile you to the patio, dignity can't be taken. It can only be surrendered. And I hadn't surrendered. I had endured. That was the reckoning. Not revenge, not possession, just endurance, patience, and the steady reminder that family is not defined by who shares your last name or who hosts the biggest party. It's defined by who shows up when you're invisible, who remembers when you're erased, who hugs you in silence and says, "You're the best uncle ever." The final act wasn't Ethan's collapse or Kayla's bitterness. It wasn't even the deed with my name on it. It was the moment I realized I had stepped out from the margins of the family story and written myself back into the center. Not through their validation, but through my own. They mocked me for old shoes, for my quiet life, for not being one of them. But in the end, I bought the very foundation beneath their feet. And while they lost everything chasing appearances, I gained everything by valuing what was real. Thanksgiving ended with laughter echoing through my house, the smell of pie still lingering in the air, and Mia's soft breathing from the guest room upstairs. I sat alone for a moment, a glass of cider in my hand, and smiled. Not because I had won, but because I had finally lived long enough to see the truth settle where it belonged. Respect isn't given by arrogance. It's earned by presence. And for the first time, I wasn't on the edge of the photo. I was in the center where I had belonged all along. The end. Before we wrap up, I want to thank you for staying with me through this story. If you enjoyed hearing it, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. It really helps me keep bringing these stories to life. I'd also love to hear what you think. Was the ending what you expected? Do you believe Ethan and Kayla got what they deserved? Or would you have handled things differently if you were in my shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. And while you're at it, let me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see people from all over tuning in. Thanks again for being here. I'll see you in the next story.